D'Artagnan rides out to meet single-handedly the mob. Greetings, this is Top Hat and Buttered Popcorn. My name is John Savers, I'm your host, and today we'll take a look at a recent film, The Man in the Iron Mask. This film was written and directed by Randall Wallace. He's the same fellow who wrote the screenplay for Braveheart, and I think is the best thing going in this particular genre, that is historical fiction, historical types of film. This particular genre has not been favored by Hollywood in the last 30 years as the interest in pornography snowballed with the vulgarization of the population under the guiding hands of the National Education Association and other social forces, magazines such as Cosmopolitan and whatnot. But be that as it may, the film itself is a beautiful film in terms of set design, costumes, and so forth. It's well written, well acted, and well directed, I think. It is, however, a little on the stately side. Therefore, it seems a little bit on the long side, and some people may not be pleased by this. However, it did not bother me. I like it and recommend this film. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Louis XIV and also as his identical twin, Philipe. Also it stars Jeremy Irons as Aramis, Gabriel Byrne as D'Artagnan, Gerard Depardieu as Porthos, and also John Malkovich as Athos. Now, these four characters are in some ways sort of elements. They sort of signify elements within humans or salient elements. For instance, Jeremy Irons' Aramis is an intellectual, religious type. Porthos is a earthy, sensual-loving man. Malkovich's Athos is the paternal, familial man. And D'Artagnan is the loyal, self-sacrificing soldier. But at any rate, the film proceeds to introduce us to these particular characters, to Louis XIV, and to the problem in the particular film. Now, the problem in the particular film is what to do with a king whose behavior is such as to be a threat to the legitimacy of the monarchical form of government. In short, the problem was Louis XIV. DiCaprio's Louis XIV is portrayed as a vain, cold, lusting kind of fellow. He is, at this point in time, fighting a war and in the process shortchanging the people who are suffering. There is not enough food. There is a problem with the food, the quality of the food, and is causing agitation and unrest. And this particular film opens up more or less with scenes of the countryside and so forth, and focuses in pretty quickly on D'Artagnan, and he introduces us to Athos. We see right off that Athos is a father. He is, I will say, played by John Malkovich, the least satisfying of these Musketeers portrayed. On the other hand, Gabriel Byrne's D'Artagnan is quite excellent, I think. He is a manly, reserved, loyal, steadfast soldier. He has paternal instincts, even though he's not a father. So that in dealing with Athos at this time, who is a father and who has a son named Raoul, who has fallen in love with a beautiful young woman and plans to marry her, he finds a sympathetic ear in D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan is in some ways someone who has shifted his paternal instincts toward his king, who is somewhat younger, I think, and his energies are kind of sent in that direction. But he understands Athos, and Athos is concerned about his son, his well-being. He is going to be taken into the Musketeers. The idea is that he will serve under D'Artagnan at the palace. He will marry this girl and have his family and be close at hand. We also get a look early on at the Aramis character played by Jeremy Irons. He is the cerebral element in this film. He is shown on one occasion, apparently at prayer, when in barges in Porthos. He has a fair sporting winch under each arm, and he proposes to a party, and he is turned down by Aramis, who says, "I'm at prayer." This is not something that is quite understandable to Porthos, but he accepts it. So we get an understanding of these men as kind of elements and what they stand for and so forth early on. The king throws a party, and the Musketeers appear, and also Raoul and his bride-to-be. The king spies the young beauty, and royal lust is engendered, and the wheels begin to turn. He also, in this particular scene, is attacked by a would-be assassin and is saved by the vigilant D'Artagnan, who impales the man with his sword, and the man is finished off by the king himself with a knife. But this does kind of open the eyes a little bit of Louis XIV as to the desperate nature of the social situation in France at that time. He blames the counselor, his chief counselor in these matters, for not providing enough food with the right quality to the people, and has him beheaded, promoting the assistant to the new position, which the assistant takes with a certain bit of fear and trembling. This being taken care of, the king surmises that his problem domestically is due to agitation by Jesuits. Therefore, he has a meeting with Aramis and gives Aramis the mission of finding the Society General and killing him. Aramis says that he will do so, and not only that, he will kill the man who points out the general to him. Well, this has a certain bit of irony to it, because as we'll later learn shortly, Jeremy Irons, Aramis, is the Jesuit general. Well, it might be also interesting to point out that at this point in time, the Jesuits probably were more interested in contesting Protestantism rather than in being sort of anticipatory Marxists. But be that as it may, parenthetically, I will say also that Disraeli, the British Prime Minister in the 19th century, a rather famous fellow, wrote, as it happens, a little novel, a roman à clef called Coningsby, in which he focused on a Jewish merchant family that was sort of modeled off the Rothschilds. But in this particular story, he looks at Spain particularly, and in mentioning this situation in Spain and the rise of this particular family and so forth, he also mentions that most of the founders of the Jesuits happen to be Jews. Well, this is presumably converts and so forth, but the implication is that the conversion was quite thin and of a practical nature. But be that as it may, Louis XIV, a Bourbon king, had blamed the Jesuits for this agitation, this stirring of the people. Well, now Aramis meets later with the Musketeers and explains to them that he is the Society General, and therefore he will have to do something about this king, because he and they realize that the problem in France is basically the foolish policies of the king, which were destructive toward the monarchy, and particularly the war. So while these things are occurring, the king himself is thinking about that pretty young woman who was with Raoul. At that particular party, he had gotten together with her, and he had sort of whispered to her a proposition, basically, that she become his mistress. She had declined, noting that she is betrothed to Raoul. Well, Louis XIV, perhaps taking a page from another king, David, son of Jesse, of the house of Judah, sends Raoul to the front. And in leading a charge, Raoul is killed. Well, it's not too much long after this, that the pretty young lady is spending her time in the embrace of the king. She moves into his palace, and he indulges his pleasure. The father of Raoul, Athos, is furious. He considers this a betrayal, almost murder, and he is determined to wreak revenge. He gets his sword, his épée, or the sharp instrument that they used at the time, and got on his horse and went hell for leather toward the palace, but is met by D'Artagnan, his young lieutenant, and 10 or 12 musketeers, and is thwarted in his charge. Except for his friendship with D'Artagnan, he might well have been killed. Moving on. Now, during the particular scene in which D'Artagnan impaled the assassin, after that party, he is met by the Queen Mother, Anne, who stops by his chambers to express her thanks for his saving her son. There are deep glances here, and suggestion that there's some kind of relationship here, and sure enough, we later on find out that they had been lovers and still are. She had subsequently gone to church, had picked up her missal or prayer book, and next to it was a long-stemmed red rose, kind of symbolic of carnal love, of passion, and so forth. Well, the events continue apace. We do have a scene where now it should be said that throughout this opening episode there are periodic brief cuts to a man in an iron mask, and we now have Aramis dressed up as a friar, a very fat friar, going off with Porthos and Athos to a dungeon via vote, And this is the facility in which this man with the iron mask, or in the iron mask, resides. And Aramis, as this portly friar, apparently Italian, convinces the jailers that he is there to hear confession of this man and to let him in. He is not the regular priest. They let him in, and he enters the chamber where the man in the iron mask is. The jailers go off. He quickly unfolds his, lifts his cassock. We see strapped to his belly a man, a medium-sized man. He drops down. He attaches a duplicate iron mask to this man. The man in the iron mask is not too quick on the uptake, but he finally gets the message. He's strapped onto Aramis. Aramis then calls out to the jailers words to the effect that this guy is dead, or apparently dead, possibly of the plague. The jailers had wanted to take a peek at the guy, take his mask off just to see who it was, but to stop this from happening, Aramis screamed plague. They got straw and set the body afire and so forth. So the evidence was thus removed. Meanwhile, with the man in the iron mask strapped to his belly, Aramis escapes in the boat with Porthos and Athos. They take the man to a rustic location, and there they release him. Now, because of these earlier brief cuts to this man and his situation, we are aware of the tremendous sensory deprivation that he suffered, because we see one instance of his calculating something, and then he goes up and he looks through his bars and he sees the full moon. He had apparently calculated when the full moon would appear at the small aperture in his cell. And he gazes at the big, luminous, lovely moon, the only beauty in his life of tremendous deprivation. So when they remove the mask, he has a look of pale and almost cadaver-like appearance, and his emotions are slow. His sensory is kind of stunned or stupefied. Slowly he becomes around. He drinks a little wine, which is like nepenthe, warm, drawing away the pains of the body. He is by a hearth, and the warmth of the fire begins to have its effect, and he begins to come forth to sort of blossom his life again. They talk to him about their plans. He, I believe, realizes who he is, but if not, they shortly explain that he is going to be a substitute for Louis XIV. He has some doubts about pulling it off and so forth, but they are pressing this. There's a mask ball in about 3 weeks, and they want to get him ready for it and make the switch then. So each in his own way begins to school this lad, this young man, in the ways of being a king thereafter. At the party, the king, Louis XIV, the real one, goes through his usual routine. They managed to drug him, as I recall, and he has to leave. And it is at this point that the imposter, Philipe, comes forward as Louis XIV. He dresses the part, he looks the part, of course, and he is taken to be Louis XIV by almost everyone. The real Louis XIV is shanghaied into the back and held hostage by Aramis, Porthos, Malkovich, his Athos. The Queen Mother somehow realizes that this man is not Louis, but is her other son, Philipe, who she had thought had died at birth. She was aware that something had happened here, but precisely what she did not know, but she thought she had lost her son. So she was delighted and whispered to him that she wanted to see him in her chambers as soon as the party with the ball was over. And so he knew that she knew. Also, D'Artagnan is beginning to look very sharply at this man, scrutinizing this man. Something is not quite right in his mind about this Louis. Well, it does not take long for him to go into action. He spoils this ruse. The pretender, Philipe, is taken into custody. Louis XIV is released, freed to his kingship. He sentences his brother to forever wear the Iron Mask again. His brother's pleading for mercy and so forth, not to be put back into the Iron Mask, but to no avail. They had almost escaped, but the pretender, Philipe, had been dragged off of the escaping boat out of the clutches, the protective clutches of Aramis and Athos and Porthos, and taken prisoner by D'Artagnan's people, and therein met with his brother and sentenced. So he's taken back in the Iron Mask to a dungeon-like cell. Aramis is not done with this at all, and he makes up his mind that they're going to spring Philipe, and one way or the other, he is going to be made the king, or they're going to die trying. They figure it will be death. So this over-the-hill gang decides that they'll put on the old musketeer uniforms. So it just so happens Aramis has a complete set for each, Athos, Porthos, and himself. They don these musketeer outfits and look smashing, look really great, get their swords and head to the dungeon where Philipe is held. D'Artagnan, meanwhile, meets with the Queen Mother, and she learns from Anne that she was the father, rather he was the father of her son, Louis XIV, and Philipe. So now he knows that he is the father, and he also knows that he has to make a decision whether or not to stand by Philipe, rather Louis, who is a bad king, a cruel and a ruthless sort of person, or to stand by his other son, Philipe, who has suffered greatly and perhaps is a better man. He decides finally on Philipe. Now, when the four musketeers, three musketeers actually get to Philipe, they're joined by D'Artagnan, who makes the fourth. They cross swords in the all for one and one for all mode, and their sword is joined by one held by Philipe, 5 blades. So they set out for freedom or death. And on the way, they encounter, their course is blocked by Louis XIV and by the lieutenant of the Musketeers, D'Artagnan's right-hand man, and some 10 or 12 musketeers, each holding a musket, a flintlock. Well, there's nothing for it but to go forward. The decision is made to charge. Parenthetically, Jimmy Hoffa is said to have, in his younger days, given forth the advice that when confronted with a gun at close range, charge. When confronted with a knife, run away. Now, Hoffa was a pretty tough guy and seemed to know a little bit about these kinds of things. At any rate, the musketeers seem to have the same idea, because they charge the musketeers, the muskets go off. There's a great blast, a great billowing of smoke and so forth. And when the smoke in cloudy scene clears, we see that all the musketeers are still alive. They are slowly marching forward, their swords held and combat ready. Now, when this is noted by the lieutenant and the other musketeers, they have a change of loyalty, and this is signaled by a sword to the heart gesture. And so Louis is left kind of in a tough situation. He has no one to defend him. Philipe is close at hand, so Louis decides to kill him himself and makes a lunge with a knife. D'Artagnan intercedes his body, and Louis XIV is thwarted and undone, and the Musketeers manage to put this impostor, Philipe, his half-brother, into the position of Louis XIV, King of France, and in the process produce the greatest of all the regal regimes of France. But the days of the great monarchy in France are doomed, and the days of the Bourbons are numbered. For Louis XVI would find his head falling at the hands of the Masonic Templar revolutionaries, and there would be no D'Artagnans left to protect him and the monarchy, and the Bourbons cease, and their place, their sovereign hold on France is replaced by the Templar communes, and the days of patriotism dwindle down, wane into nothing, and the days of greed and bankers and usury come to the fore. And in the darkness that followed, you could hear from the people in the darkness the quiet warning, who can stand against the beast?